Don't miss this year's Commercial UAV Expo in Las Vegas on September 5th through the 7th. It's the leading international trade show and conference focusing on the integration and operation of commercial UAS. Go to expouav.com for more information and to register.
What we're going to do during the Advanced Airspace Summit is break down with the experts who are using the airspace. Hey, what are some of these concepts? What's a drone corridor? What is that going to be used for eventually? How does it connect? Who controls that airspace? How is it used? There's going to be some topics about these different regulations we're talking about. Everyone here that owns a drone is probably familiar with Part 107. What is Part 108?
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome back to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 404. After my nearly 3-month hiatus, in which I spent a month in Paris and caught up with some other hobbies here in Tampa, it's good to be podcasting again and talking about the drone industry. So let's jump into it. Should crewed and uncrewed aircraft systems be flying in the same airspace? For that question, we head to Cave Creek, Arizona, to speak with Toni Drummond, President U.S. for Titan Aviation Global, a worldwide aviation management, jet charter, and sales company. Titan's mission is to be the most trusted advisors for the best private travel experience by providing a personalized, efficient, safe, and convenient experience to all who fly with them. Toni is a highly recognized private and emerging aviation specialist with a unique background in business jet flight operations, aviation logistics and regulations, as well as sales and business development. With an education in business management, she has held management positions within the world's leading aviation companies until starting her first aviation consulting business in 2008. Toni is an expert in sustainable and emerging aviation ecosystems using eVTOL and hybrid vehicles. She spends most of her time traveling and speaking around the world about sustainable flight departments and efforts leaning into collaborative, future-facing air mobility. She consults on emerging aviation projects in vertical infrastructure and electric charging, eVTOL and sustainable ecosystems, as well as emerging UAS technologies. Global Aerial Management Group, which is Toni's first woman-owned emerging technologies company, was the winner of the 2021 Women in Drones Team Innovation Award. She was also named as one of the top 100 women to watch in aviation and aerospace in 2021 and 2022. Toni is a member of the National Business Aviation Association's Emerging Tech Committee and co-chair of the National Air Transport Association's Advanced Air Mobility Committee. As efforts continue to integrate uncrewed aircraft into the national airspace, there are questions as to whether uncrewed systems should be integrated with crewed systems in the same airspace. Currently, there's a gap between crewed and uncrewed aviation. That gap has cultivated a sense of mistrust across technologies and industries, but it's one that extends to the general public as well. This year's Commercial UAV Expo will dedicate a full day to this gap through the UAV Expo's Advanced Airspace Summit. The summit will discuss where the industry is today, how the technology will evolve over the next decade to bridge the gap, what regulatory changes will likely be necessary, and the challenges the industry will face related to passenger expectations and public acceptance. Toni will be one of the moderators of the Advanced Airspace Summit. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Toni talks about Titan Aviation Global and advanced air flight, the challenges and opportunities for integrating crewed and uncrewed systems into the same airspace, and how the Commercial UAV Expo Advanced Airspace Summit will help elevate the discussion among industry professionals. But before we hear from Toni, I want to stress that your support is the heartbeat of my podcast. Every episode is crafted with you in mind, and your generous donations ensure I can keep delivering the content you love. Whether it's the price of a cup of coffee or a more substantial contribution, every bit helps to defray the cost of production. Donate today and be a vital part of the podcast's continued journey to greatness. And for a limited time, donate $100 or more and receive an official Drone Radio Show coffee mug. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And if you can, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and leave a nice review and rating on iTunes. It really helps improve the podcast ranking among the many thousands of active podcasts today. So let's learn about the integration of crewed and uncrewed systems with Toni Drummond of Titan Aviation Global. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Toni to introduce herself.
My name is Toni Drummond, and I am the president of Titan Aviation US.
Toni, tell us about Titan Aviation. What does the company do?
I am a general aviation expert by nature. I've been doing this most of my adult life. So I started with Titan about a year ago, but Titan is about 19 to 20-year-old company that does aircraft sales, aircraft management, maintenance, all different types of stuff when you're talking about general jet services that we provide.
How would you describe your client base?
It's GA. So we're working with corporate aviation. We're working with business aviation, high net worth individuals. We're working with, tours and that type of thing, people that are traveling to do concert tours and media. Those are a little bit of the people, the type of travelers that we have flying with us internationally at Titan Aviation. We also manage, I think, 19 aircraft, something to that manage. Don't quote me on that number, but somewhere between, I'll say 15 and 19 aircraft worldwide under different certificates, depending on what region of the world we're in. So we're pretty knowledgeable when it comes to airspace, aviation, maintenance, and pretty much all things private aviation.
How is Titan Aviation different from other general aviation companies?
When you're talking about private aviation, obviously, you're not going to be a successful 20-year-old company unless you're really providing the full round service. But, when we're looking at our current model that's been very successful for a lot of years, the reason why we're talking right now on the drone podcast is because we are going to take some of these service models and push them into emerging technologies, future aviation, whether that be scaling drones or whether that be drone operations, or whether that be advanced air mobility vehicles as time moves into the future and we start looking more towards electric and hydrogen. We've been a leader in the space for a lot of years, and we want to go ahead and continue that. So the owners of Titan brought me on to kind of really dig into that, as that's one of my passion projects and my specialty for the past couple of years in my career. I've been really focused on future aviation and sustainable aviation solutions.
Let's build on that last point. As you mentioned, Titan Aviation is a successful crewed aviation company. Why is the company looking at uncrewed options?
I think that's a great question, Randy. I started a drone company personally in 2020. It was by a fluke. I had a very specific purpose, which was to do spraying with disinfectant. That was during the whole COVID thing. But with that, the reason I realized there was an intersection between drones at that point and private aviation, which I own a 135 out of Las Vegas. Well, 135 is a private charter company. So at that point, I was working on that project, and I said, wow, I need certification in order to go and spray this cleaning solution. So I realized that there was a huge overlap behind, what was going on in manned aviation and what was needed in unmanned. And basically, Randy, the quick and dirty is no matter what you have in the sky, we all share the national airspace and we all have to follow the same federal aviation regulations. There are some that are changing and we're looking to change over time. The general fix behind that is to move all of these processes and these projects and these drone delivery companies and what have you at that time that have to actually operate under an FAA Part 135, which says that you can fly in the airspace for hire. It all comes down to safety, monitoring the safety of the public and the airspace. So that's when the integration started many, many years ago. So this, not many, many years, it's 3 years ago. But, 3 years into it, we're now finally getting to a maturity point within our drone, our UAS, our unmanned industry, and even taking it a step further, intersecting into our advanced air mobility industry, where there's a clear need for the intersection of general aviation specialties, flight operations, and all of that needs to now assist our UAS operators into being able to scale and being a really important part of our ecosystem. So Titan Aviation and other aviation companies also are going to be offering those type of services to UAS companies and AAM companies that are really going to need that partnership and that collaboration in order to realize sustainable aviation goals.
Can you give us some examples where a Part 135 can facilitate uncrewed operations?
The Part 135, the FAA Part 135 pretty much mandates that anytime you're taking anything for hire, whether that be passengers, packages, cargo, and you're charging somebody for that back, you need to be running it under a 135. Right now, we have drone companies. For instance, a drone delivery company is a wonderful example of that. A company that's delivering medical supplies, a company for hire. I'll keep that in mind. If you're doing it because it's your company and you own 2 locations and you're sending it between your own company locations, that's a different certification. But if you're actually charging someone to go out and do that, it has to be scaled underneath what they call the Part 135. So the use case would be a drone delivery case or a medical delivery case where you're trying to charge people for the flights. Now you have companies doing that right now, but they're using waivers to accomplish those goals. And over time, those waivers are very limiting. They limit you very, very specifically to what you can and can't do. And that's really problematic when it comes to these companies looking to scale. Whereas, we have, I think I'm going to guess, again, don't quote me on it, I'm going to say 6 or 7, I'll throw that 7 in there, drone companies that went through I think they call it the IPP or the Beyond program now, that really help the government put a program together to help drone operators get their 135s. We got maybe 6 of them through the ranks, and it was no easy task. It's really cumbersome because you're trying to apply general aviation rules to unmanned aviation. There's some that apply and there's some that don't. So we did get those companies through, and those companies, i.e. Zipline, i.e. Matternet, Wing Aviation, have really been able to scale. And if you look at the deliveries out there, you can see how they've been able to use the certifications and operate under the current regulations that every other cargo delivery company also operates to be able to scale their business model. They're not asking for special permissions, other than their waivers right now that they have because they need. But they're functioning under general operating environments that the rest of the aviation population would also operate under.
To me, it sounds like companies with a Part 135 certification might have a leg up on most drone operators when it comes to moving people and goods with drones. Is that a fair assessment?
It is. And, from our organization, it takes a little bit of, understanding. And, you hear these words thrown out in drone world of community acceptance, community integration. When you're talking about community acceptance and community integration, there's a layer of that applies within the general aviation community. This is a community that I've worked in for over 28 years. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that are not accepting to this. They're very poo-poo towards it. It's beneath them to have to deal with, that type of thing, because there's the little stigma maybe associated with drones coming in as recreational. Most people think of drones and they think of somebody taking photographs. They don't think of drones saving granny because, God forbid, she's lost in a silver alert or there's a fire or something like that. They don't think of it in those terms or delivery. So these people in our community have not accepted truly what the scale of BV loss and other types of waivers and stuff have enabled these drones to be able to do, even without, the proper certifications. We're working with these waivers that allow for safety. All of our waivers are really based around safety case. So yeah, it's a dual-edged sword. It's a double sail.
So while general aviation companies have the advantage, they may have some apprehension or bias that gets in the way of the opportunity.
That's exactly it. So it's just people eventually will be looking at this, people that have general aviation fleets. I'm a big supporter of electric aviation and hydrogen aviation in the future, and lots of different sustainable multimodal different platforms that we're researching right now. I believe this to be a good stepping stone as we used helicopters and those type of vehicles in the past. I believe that this to be a more, sustainable addition to how we use our airspace right now. And there's lots of different schools of thought on what that looks like. So I'm not going to really get into that. But I really believe that one model using drones to proof out our use cases, to test out our airspace in a really safe manner, like over farmland, where things will happen, where you're going to have failures. That's part of innovating, is the failure, but that you're going to really minimize that risk. To be able to move into these next phases of what aviation is going to be able to test out and bring to the public, we're in a whole new revolution. So I really believe that, and I have for many years, that one ecosystem ties into another, which ties into another. And for me, as an expert in GA and now really becoming knowledgeable in UAS and advanced air mobility, it's a really clear picture of how we collaborate, we work together to improve the quality of life for all of us living here.
Will crewed and uncrewed systems share the same airspace, or will they operate in separate airspaces?
We're going to share the air. We have different ways of looking at that, depending on what level you're at in the airspace. Are you flying under 400 feet? Are you flying over 400 feet? No matter what you look at, there's going to be intersections in certain airspaces. And there's certain airspaces that allow for drones, and there's certain that do not. What they're planning on doing, and again, I'm not the expert who wrote some of these documents that came out over the summer, but we had two really interesting documents come out over the summer that were put out by the FAA. Now, one of them is called Innovate 28, which is a really cool playbook for how they plan on bringing advanced air mobility vehicles into the national airspace and into the ecosystem that we currently have. And the other one was back in, I'm going to say May of this year. I'm just going to guess it out. And that was the drone ConOps. It was the UAM ConOps. So I'm going to say drone, airspace, whatever you want to call it. So if you start to collide both two documents, one thing you see very clear on there is corridor use. We're using a lot of third-party providers from industry that are going to help us with the airspace. We do have these corridors where the airspace is going to be very, very controlled for a certain maybe 50 miles or something like that, where they can really just gather so much data and have a safe way for people to either transport, use case it out to get started. And this goes for advanced air mobility vehicles. I mean, like electrically powered aircraft that we might use right now that have converted over to electric. There's some concepts out there too that are looking to test out. So yes, if you start to look into what the FAA is putting out, there's not a lot of discussion about it, but there is a clear signs of where they're planning and what they're heading into. And, there's other concepts involved in there, like, unmanned traffic management's been something that they've been working on for a long time. How's that intersecting with ATC? So we've got lots of different moving variables, but we will be sharing the same airspace. That is 100%.
The intersection of crewed and uncrewed systems is going to get special attention at this year's Commercial UAV Expo with a day-long Advanced Airspace Summit. Let's talk about the summit and why people may want to attend. But first, Toni, what is advanced airspace?
When we talk about advanced airspace, it's advanced usage. So there's certain terms and certain concepts that the FAA and industry are putting out there on how are we going to integrate advanced air mobility vehicles, drones, and aircraft into the national airspace. Balloons, there's lots of different, blimps, there's lots of different things that use the airspace right now and how are we going to intersect that? So we really took it a step further with the Commercial UAV Expo that's coming up September 5th through 7th in Las Vegas. So what we're going to do during the Advanced Airspace Summit is break down with the experts who are using the airspace. Hey, what are some of these concepts? What's a drone corridor? What is that going to be used for eventually? How does it connect? Who controls that airspace? How is it used? So these are questions about advanced airspace and how we're going to connect. There's going to be some topics about these different regulations we're talking about, Randy. Everyone here that owns a drone is probably familiar with Part 107. What is Part 108? That's a new one. So unless you're really in that space and you've been following along, it's confusing. So we have people on these panels that are literally in that space talking to the feds and working and living and breathing, and they're going to break it down for us nice and simple. So I'm really excited about having these conversations and really just explaining that we're at a time where we need to work together to really solve these problems.
Are you moderating the summit?
Personally moderating 2 panels during the Airspace Summit, and then one the following day on Thursday, which is kind of like a whole half hour that we're just putting aside for questions. We know a lot of questions are going to come out of the Airspace Summit that aren't going to be able to be answered. And myself and Dawn Zoldi from P3 Tech Consulting are going to host a moderated session that's like a lot of Q&A of just like, people having questions rolling over from that summit.
The Advanced Airspace Summit is organized into 4 broad sessions. I'm going to identify each session, and I'd like for you to tell us what it's about and what we might expect to hear from the panelists. The first session is on cultivating public trust.
Public trust is really about who's using the airspace right now, how are we using it, and how can we get the public to support what we're doing, including what we just mentioned, between drones, UAM, unmanned vehicles, manned vehicles. What does that look like? What are the technologies that we're currently using right now to be able to enable us to detect and avoid and make our airspace really, really safe? We're going to be talking about that. We have panelists that are using seek and avoid, detect and avoid systems and sensors. So we're going to talk about what does that technology look like? How does using that technology give us faith in the airspace? We have Abby Smith from the FAA. She works in that division. What is going on with the challenges that we're facing today, and what is the regulatory pathways that we're using to make our whole entire NAS safe? Are we using current regulatory pathways? Are we creating new ones? So those are some of the questions and answers we're really going to be talking about during that segment. And we have Erin from North Dakota, who is with the Vantis program. Again, they're putting DV loss, they're coming up with a solution of how to enable. This is a how-to, not a how not to, which most of the things we sit through are, we wish we could, but we can't. Here's what we wish we could do, and here's what we're doing anyway, and here's what we've gotten the approvals for because we're thinking outside the box. That's what this is. And I hope that people can leave that session with some really fresh ideas, linking up with some of our panelists there to collaborate on future use cases that will enable better use of our airspace.
Session 2 is on a topic that I've done a few podcasts on, called drone corridors. How will it be handled at the summit?
We're talking about the drone corridor use. And like I said, the urban air mobility ConOps that was put out was very clear about how that's going to look. They have different systems of it. I think they call it initial, midterm, and mature operating environments within those corridors. I know for fact right now that there's at least 4 corridors, test corridors that are open. There's one in Oklahoma connecting Texas. There's one in upstate New York. There's a bunch of them. I'm not naming them off here, but there's a bunch of them forming. So we really want to hear from those people. What does this look like? How is it working? What do we anticipate? Weather forecasting within the corridors, and how are we using cooperative practices, like using industry? Because again, the FAA is we're here to keep you safe. You got to figure some of this out yourself. So industry is going, okay, how about this? And collaborating that together.
Session 3 is the regulatory framework.
That's a really great session. This is all the questions that I feel like I've been being asked since the beginning of the year is, can you please tell me how 135, do I need 135? What is 135? What is Part 91? These are all federal FAA. This is not something we'd have a class for this overseas, unless you're crazy. But these are the FAA regulations on what we're doing here in our airspace. And we're really just defining what is 107. We know what 107 is. How do our waivers apply? What kind of waivers apply? How do we get those waivers? What is 108? Great question. Everybody's asking, what is 108? When is it coming into effect? Who uses it? What is that regulation? Does it apply to my operation? Can I scale using it? These are all the questions that we're going to answer. We're going to do the same with Part 135, which is private charter. We'll probably touch on Part 121, which is commercial airlines, just so people understand the different regulations and what they're dealing with. But for the most part, it's operating within the airspace under those regulations. So as a drone person, you probably never thought in a million years you would need to understand any of that. But as we mature into the industry, it's really important that we all understand. Even for me as an expert, let me get refreshed. Part 108 is new. That's new to me. So I had to learn all of that. So really hope to educate the people that are there to understand how this is going to apply so they can properly scale their business.
The final session may be the most fun, talking drones, cargo, and air taxi operations.
Yeah, that's where it gets fun, right? So we're going to start talking more and more about this, Randy, every year that goes by. And I'm saying every year because I attend all the shows. I attend AM shows, UAS shows, and general aviation shows. And I feel it. I'm there now. Like we're totally sensing the intersection. We're feeling it. So this is something we're going to talk about. Dawn Pazaldai, who we know and love as our Dawn of Drones, she is hosting this one. She's moderating this panel. She's also moving fast into the AAM space. We're both kind of getting pushed with this wave of innovation and expertise into this space. So she's hosting that one. And we're really going to be talking about, you know what is it going to take for us to put a person on an eVTOL? What does that mean? What does that look like for us to put a person on an eVTOL and start traveling, using drones nonetheless, right? Because right now eVTOL are going to start out with pilots, but eventually they're being built to scale to go unmanned. That goes, in their mature growth, maybe in 2050, if all goes well, we might be having an airspace that can accommodate that type of thing. We might have our technology caught up to our safety level where there's almost no risk to do something like that. So they're going to go into some future-facing technologies here, what it looks like, what's needed. They're going to talk about advanced air mobility infrastructure. Where do we charge the vehicles? It's only a 30-minute quick chat, but it's going to be a pretty in-depth chat within those 30 minutes because of the people that are on those panels. Again, these groundbreaking individuals that are working towards opening up this new way for us to travel, this more sustainable way for us to travel in aviation.
I'm not sure if you're aware, Toni, but my background is in city planning. So the possibility of adding electric air systems into the urban environment as a transit option is really exciting to me.
Oh, Randy, the stuff that's out there right now is mind-blowing. I mean, they're putting I don't want to say smart cities because that's a scary thought where you feel like you're completely controlled. I'm going to say sustainable cities. We have a lot of concepts right now that I'm talking about at other more advanced air mobility type shows that are really leaning into how to intersect our current infrastructure when it comes to cars, when it comes to aircraft like this. A lot of city planners or somebody or urban development people or somebody I've never spoken to in my career because I never had a need to. And now I do because it's really important that we understand as we build out a new revolution of travel that everyone's able to be accommodated. And I know people in my industry will laugh at me because it's not going to start like that, in my opinion. We are going to probably start by, again, having people that have money to fly in a helicopter or something like that, flying these aircraft to start. But we are going to push towards more sustainable goals and, being able to have diversity in travel. Everybody should be able to travel. Shouldn't just be reserved for the wealthy.
Very cool. Now, getting back to the summit, how will you define success? I mean, how will you know that the summit provided the value that you envision?
The predictor of how I would judge a successful summit will be, did I blur the lines enough? Are the lines blurry where I could put the same summit on in a general aviation setting, like national business aviation or national air transportation, where I'm on committees there? Like, what if I were to put that summit in there? Would they be responsive to it? Did we do enough to be able to blur those lines between advanced air mobility and drones and manned and unmanned and understand that we all care about the safety of the airspace? Like, am I able to do that? A second really powerful, I would love to hear from people after the summit that said, you know what, Toni, I'm applying some of the stuff I learned from the summit and I'm now going to be able to scale my business. I'm now going to be able to stay in business because I am working with another 135. There's things we constantly do in general aviation that we can apply. And I'm not saying all of them because some of them we don't want to bring into the future. Trust me when I tell you that, Randy. You want to leave some of that old stuff in the past. But some of these techniques and some of these ground handling and different things that we've done in the past, they're effective and we can use them to help us scale into UAS. Like 135 is not new. Many, many, many people on this world use that federal aviation regulation every single day, but it's new to drone people. It's new to unmanned. So we have to get them to understand. So that would be a success for me at the end to hear people really being able to use what they learned during this summit to protect their business, to grow their business, and to help them expand.
What do you think has to happen for more general aviation players to venture into uncrewed operations?
I think it's starting to happen. And what I've noticed over the past couple of years are, at first everybody telling me, Toni, you're absolutely crazy. What are you doing starting a drone company? This makes no sense. Why do you need this? And really, I think When you look at the crewed aviation world, number one, it's fear factor. We are scared of what we don't understand as a humanity. That's just general and 101, like we're scared of what we don't know. So there's not enough knowledge base within manned aviation to understand all the safety that we're doing in unmanned. A good example would be even what we do in manned aviation. I was at eBase, which is European Business Aviation show that's put on every single year in Geneva, Switzerland. And while we're inside at a sustainability summit, we're literally coming up with really creative ways on how to use sustainable aviation fuel and drones and advanced air mobility to get the carbon out of the air. There's people outside breaking into the airport, staging a riot because there's private jets being used. Do you see what I'm saying? It's the lack of education and the lack of knowledge and it's literally just a lack of understanding that causes people to be fearful. And then they react and they act out on fear. So my goal is to remove that fear factor, to help people understand that the technologies that we use to make sure that the drone is not going to hit the plane. The drone that's going to hit the plane is one that's flying illegally, not one that's flying legally with all the right detect and avoid and ADS-B and different types of equipment and technologies we have to make sure that we can hear you and see you. So I believe that it's a big part of education. And I will say that I'm excited that for the first time ever in 2024, when I put panels in to start my speaking for 2023, I put a lot of panels on introducing GA into what is advanced air mobility, what are drones, how are they going to affect our airspace, don't be scared, all of that good stuff. Nobody's interested in hearing about that for the past couple of years. They don't feel like anybody wants to learn about it. But this year they said yes. They said, you know what, Toni? Yes, this year I think there's enough going on. The FAA has been very, very loud. We have lots of going on, on the Hill, kinds of different laws that are being looked at and putting into effect. So I think this is the year that we're going to see a lot of movement. We are anticipating our very first advanced air mobility vehicle overseas to come into service this year in 2024. And once that happens, like all other technology, people are going to fear it less. We all know 1,000 people that said they'll never use a cell phone because of A, B, and C. And there's barely anybody on the planet that is without a cell phone at this point. So,
what are some of the signs that will indicate that advanced airspace operations are picking up momentum?
You're going to see an increase in deliveries because of regulations. Because number one, let's look at the waiver system. We're getting waivers much easily. They're streamlined. The FAA is looking for reasons to say yes. Maybe 3 years ago, they didn't know enough, so they didn't have enough data, so they weren't saying yes. Now they're saying yes. We can get waivers more easily, which means that you're going to see more deliveries. You're going to see more commerce going on. Another thing that's going to be really, really, and I've been preaching this for years, what's great for our industry right now is to have our first responders visible. Remember, when you see a drone saving someone's life, including your own, you're going to now think differently every time you see a drone. 3 years ago, if I posted up when I used to have a drone company, I had a spraying drone. It was a scary looking drone. It looked like a spider. Is it going to kill me? Now people are more like, oh, that drone would help with firefighting. That drone helps with, they have a better understanding based on what's being fed to them. So I think that we're going to have that happening. So we're going to have population and community see exactly what we're doing and how we're trying to use drones for good. Hashtag drones for good. It's all about drones for good. And then we're going to add more commerce onto it. We're delivering medical items. We have companies like DroneUp that are working with giant corporations like Walmart that have those kind of marketing dollars. It's becoming more commonplace. Nobody's told me over the past year, you're crazy for having a drone company, because it dissipated. And I believe that that's going to be, if I look through, and I'm not a huge tech person, but if I look through the past, 10 years of what's happened in aviation and tech, again, it all ends up blending in after a while when I don't want to say you force people's hand, but you get them to understand that this is definitely something to help us, not to harm us.
What about the opportunities for heavy lift drones and cargo delivery?
There's multiple models out there right now that you can actually load pallets onto. And, when we talk about the beginning of what this is going to look like, taking that kind of carbon, when you can literally say, I would normally move this in a truck or an airplane, when you're able to go back and say, we use this and it took this many cars off the road, you can literally take the economics behind that and the data to almost pinpoint exactly how much carbon's coming off of the roads and equate that. How many people are being saved because they're not breathing in all that carbon anymore. So, there's lots of different ways that we can do that. And I think over time, we're really going to start to see that with the heavy lift drones. Also, being able to get a regulatory body, being able to get your aircraft. Right now, if you have a cargo drone, you have to have your cargo drone. You're doing what? You're carrying goods for hire. Somebody's paying you to move the goods. That means you have to be under a 135 or a waiver. It's super restrictive. By the time I talk to you next year, I'll probably have a couple of drone companies, at least under the 135s that we're operating right now, to help them assist in scaling. There's no need for you guys to go out and get one. If you're online to get one, it could take up to 3 or 4 years. Go ahead, take your time. And while you're doing that, we'll still help you scale and then help you transpose your operation over to your certificate when it's ready. So again, we're offering solutions. And I'm saying we because I'm the one who's working on this now, but there's going to be other companies like mine that say, oh, look what Toni's doing. We can do that too. And I want them to, because obviously it's going to take a lot of us in order to get this done, right? So offering solutions to these companies is critical. That's also going to help us bring in business from overseas, to help us bring new companies in that want to also, start up here and pay their taxes and build up here so they can become American. They want to bring their product here. There's a lot of good companies that will do that as well. So that's pretty much where I see that. Oh, also I'll throw in that we have eVTOL now in the farming industry. How awesome is that? Talking about making life more sustainable and getting chemicals out of the air, being much more precise about where you're spraying. So we have eVTOL vehicles, heavy lift, that are working our farmlands right now, saving our farmers.
And I think probably one of the questions that I get most is, how close are we to seeing the first air taxi transport an individual from one place to another?
We are less than a year out out from that. Yes, that will happen in Paris in 2024 at the Paris Olympics on volocopters. Well, that's what's being predicted. So I'm just going to add to that prediction. And I didn't do my research on whether I feel like it's going to come true, so don't place your bets. But what's being predicted is that, yes, Europe is doing things a little different than we are here. They have in my opinion, they might have it slightly more together than we do as far as regulations are concerned, but that's okay. We're still working through stuff. But they are touting the first movement of passenger movement on a vehicle at the 2024 Olympics. And then we anticipate the first passenger movements within the US in 2025. So, Randy, we're not that far out. In order for 2025 to get here in the US, we've got a lot of other problems like ground infrastructure and air and all the rest of it. But in a perfect world, theoretically speaking, this is what's being predicted by the masses of economists.
This is all very exciting, Toni. Is Titan Aviation going to pursue some of the opportunities that we discussed today?
Yes, sir, we are. That's why I'm here. That's why they pulled me off of another consulting job and said, please, 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 because I love this company. It's got great roots overseas. It's got great roots in Dubai, which is a real hot spot for advanced air mobility. We don't have as many regulations there, and they're a little bit more to try on getting it moving. Obviously, there's a lot less planes in the air, so the safety issue is different. But yeah, Titan Aviation is going to be putting in orders for likely electric aircraft, not just electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, but just electric powered aircraft. So we can use it for some of our projects that we're working on, whether that be delivery. And we definitely 100% will be moving into the eVTOL space, where we're going to be operating electric vehicles for hire to move passengers within routes to start, for sure. So that's been a lot of fun for me, doing research and starting to talk to manufacturers and really finding out what type of models are out there. I'm over here doing that, and there's still people in the industry, Randy, that don't even think this is a thing. So it's so like alternate universe to be me right now, or many people like me.
And for my final question, Toni, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
I want to tell everybody out there to please, please, please do not give up on your dream. Literally, you hit a failure. Remember, it's just a roadblock. Keep going. Collaborate. If you feel like you're struggling, find solutions. Reach out. Talk to people. We need everybody working together. We need your businesses. We need the competition. We need bulk, and we need scale in order to be effective. So please keep moving forward, and remember that failure is just a part of the recipe to success.
That's it for episode 404 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Toni Drummond of Titan Aviation Global. I want to thank Toni for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Titan Aviation Global or want to connect with Toni, check out the webpage at titanaviation.aero. For information on the Advanced Aviation Summit or the Commercial UAV Expo in Las Vegas on September 5th through the 7th, go to expouav.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, then please subscribe and share. Write a glowing review on iTunes. And if you're able, donate to keep the podcast going. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goertz.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.